Okay, hi, welcome to the second episode of this sort of mini series which I'm doing, which is essentially just recommending Doctor Who stories from each Doctor to either see or avoid if you are new to the series, and sort of my reasoning for my personal opinion of why it is that they're not so good to check out. Second one, so we're going to check out Patrick Troughton now, with it being the second episode, second Doctor. This was tough because I must admit that he is my favorite Doctor, I think, from the old series anyway, and how I like a lot of his stuff, a lot of his episodes, and particularly from the stuff we're getting more because of all the missing episodes being animated that we haven't got yet. So just had to pick some out and thinking about which ones I didn't like as much compared to the others. So we'll just kind of hop into it. A couple of them were a bit easier than others, but yeah. So here's the three which I would say avoid if you want to get into the series from Patrick Troughton. So the first one, Underwater Menace. Fans of the series shouldn't be too surprised with this pick. It is a very jumbled episode all over the show and just sort of feels a bit too overly dramatic, and then particularly with the way they animated the story. Rather than going with the computer animation that they've done for the likes of Power of the Daleks, Through from the Deep, whatever else, they went with the telesnap shots. And essentially, for those who don't know the difference, basically the ones I mentioned, they were done with computer animation and stuff, whereas with telesnaps, they essentially just sync the audio with still pictures, and you don't necessarily get the kind of same effect when you have them moving around and stuff. So it kind of made this whole really sort of feel rushed and very cheap with what they did, because they essentially just released it, I think, when they found another episode for it, and they just kind of wanted to get it out as quickly as possible. But this is very cheap overall, and I would say that it's just a very weak story in a lot of ways. So avoid it if you're new to the series, and be sure to check out Patrick Troughton's other stuff first. This one might prove a tad controversial next, but again, it was difficult to choose. I had to pick three for this list for my taste. So the Faceless Ones. So this is one of those ones where it's a category of, it's not necessarily bad, but when you compare it to some of the other stuff that Patrick Troughton has done, that this is comparatively weaker. So I would suggest checking out some of the other animations that aren't this one, because they do kind of hold a better lighting to what kind of quality you get from the story, as well as how it kind of reflects in the motions and stuff. So this one is kind of a case of not too bad, but don't look at it straight away until you've seen at least one other animated story to see about how good they can be. In that regard, so I would say that's the reason why I would avoid Faceless Ones as one of the immediate ones to check out from the old series. But again, it's not a bad story, I would say, but I had to pick three for the list, so I had to go with it in that regard. And then final one is the Dominators, because again, this is just one of these ones where, again, from my personal opinion, from watching it a second time, that it's not a necessarily bad episode, but just again, you compare it to the rest of Patrick Troughton stuff, it doesn't hold as much of a good lighting to how he works as a Doctor, and then just the way the story's told. It just feels quite weak comparatively, so it's just one of those ones that it's not very good to check out straight away, but I think some people might appreciate it more sort of down the line when they see the other stuff that has been created. And yeah, so again, just like I said in my previous episode, that these aren't in terms of my personal preference in their order, it's just their chronology of when they showed on television, which I'd done that list in that way. So yeah. So that's it for the episodes that I would not recommend, but again, with Patrick Troughton, you can't really go too wrong with the majority of the stories, so got those. Moving on to the ones that I would recommend, so again, chronological order. Power of the Daleks. Now, I said in my previous episode how I generally think it's better to go with a 4-part story first and then a 6-part story, just in terms of the length that you have of this, because it's 25 minutes per episode, and then that means basically essentially like watching a film, as it were, with some gaps here and there with some cliffhangers. But this is a very good example, and what definitely was worth the hype when the episode was released in full animation. It definitely recaptured the sort of look of the story, I'd say, very well. I saw the loose cannon reconstruction, which was telesnaps again, and I found the episode quite boring. I looked at this, I fell in love with it. It is great, and the story itself is really interesting, and definitely kind of a weird thing considering the fact that this is actually set in 2020 and obviously in 2021, and we're nowhere near a planet called Vulcan. So yeah, great story, great start for Patrick Troughton, great Dalek episode overall. So yeah, so we've got those ones. Then the next one is, I'm going to say, probably one of my favourite ones of all time, just in terms of overall Doctor Who stories, and that is Tomb of the Cybermen. I mean, I can't really think of what else to say that hasn't already been said from other people that might have reviewed this. This is just a very compelling whodunit type of scenario story with this whole entering the forbidden tomb of Tutankhamun type feel to it, with the sci-fi aspect thrown in. The music is intense, the atmosphere is so claustrophobic, and it just, you just get captivated by everything about this. This is such a great episode, and I would highly, highly recommend it to anybody for getting into the series. I watched this a lot of times. I just never get enough of it. It's that damn good of a story. And then the final one for Patrick Troughton that I would recommend for newcomers, which again is difficult because a lot of them, and that is the Seeds of Death. Again, this is kind of breaking my previous rule about doing 6 parts rather than 4 parts with this, but again, it's just one story that I can just not get enough of. Like, I've seen it a couple of times, and it's just, again, the atmosphere just feels very, it's a huge sense of suspense, and just the severity of the situation. The Ice Warriors in this are so creepy. It's so tense with so many things. You just never know about what's going to happen around, each bend and everything, and just all the cliffhangers I think are particularly like either chilling or just overall really dramatic. I think it's just a very strong story, and again, just one I think will be served very well as a good first episode for somebody that wants to get into the old series. But yeah, absolutely fantastic. And I will say, as this other thing, if I ever do like a top 10 list of my favorite classic episodes, that I did not include my number 1 favorite classic episode in this, which is actually a Patrick Troughton story, but I think it's because there's other stories that need to be appreciated sort of more in a way. And I have that one as my top favorite for my own reasons, which I may or may not get into if I ever do a list like that. But yeah, that's it for this video, and I shall catch you next time for when I do John Pertwee stories. So long, take care.